Hello, Stitchers. Welcome to Stitch Please, the official podcast of Black Women Stitch, the sewing group where Black Lives Matter. I'm your host, Lisa Woolford. I'm a fourth-generation sewing enthusiast with more than 20 years of sewing experience. I am looking forward to today's conversation, so sit back, relax, and get ready to get your stitch together. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Stitch Please podcast. I am your host, Lisa Woolford, and I am honored and delighted and so excited to wrap up this Juneteenth series with Shaw. Jacqueline, it's hard to summarize all that Jacqueline does and has done. Training in sustainability. She concentrates in African fashion. She takes seriously the global concerns about exploitation and celebrates with such love the beauty, the richness, the depth of what the continent has to offer the fashion world. So, Jacqueline, I am so glad that you are here. Welcome to the Stitch Please podcast.
Thank you, Lisa. I am too excited, and it is an honor to be here. So thank you for inviting me.
And thank you so much for navigating the time change to speak with me from London. This is very generous. And I never forget, this is an absolute time difference, and you have to be up 5 hours at a different time than I am. So thank you very much. How did you get started? Do you have a sewing story? Did you start with sewing and design? When did you get the message that I love to create and this is something I would like to do?
Wowza. I can probably go from early memories. I never remember how old I was, but I do remember maybe I was around 7, something like that. And I'd received as a gift from my mother the fashion wheel. So this was a toy that you spun the wheel and then it would help you to draw designs together and put your own designs together. And I remember having that toy and also just sewing clothes for my teddy bears. I mean, people would laugh when I talk about it. I didn't have dolls, I had teddy bears. I was a teddy lover. So I would just sew things by hand as a child and always creating things. I talk about how I created like ping pong games with a ping pong game with an old cereal box, like cornflakes or something that I used, like elastic band and marbles, and I made like a ping pong game. But I don't know how I did these crazy things. So I was always creating, and I always knew that I loved the idea of building something from nothing. And from there, with the fashion wheel and just a love of textiles, I always like bright colored textiles, prints and all kinds of things like that. As a child, I moved to a new area, went to a new school, and I met my first time, mostly being around Caribbeans, which is where my family are from, in the area I was first in. Then I moved to another area and there was like a big Asian community. When I say Asian, I mean like Pakistani, Indian, Bangladeshi, that community. And
yes.
Then I'd also have my Nigerian and Ghanaian friends. And I started to become friends with these different groups of people and go to some weddings, go to some events. And I love culture and I would learn. And I just got introduced to more and more textiles and then fell in love with African textiles even more. And that was part of my journey. But within all of this, thinking about what I wanted to do when I left school, I decided, though my maths teacher was horrified, I remember that when I was like 15 to 16, deciding which college to go to. We say college as in like second, just after, I don't know what you guys call it in the US, but from the age of 16 to 18, you go to a 2-year college, A-level college we call it. And I decided to pursue the arts, as well as English and maths. And then when I went to university at 18, I decided to do a fashion degree and make it more official. So it's been an interesting journey. I've always known I've been creative, but I've always been a bit of a bookworm and loved maths and loved things that where I have to, like in science, I always loved the physics side of things because I can put numbers together. So I guess in fashion, it was really the pattern cutting and so forth, putting numbers together, putting things together and making something else. So it's just something just innate in me. But yeah, here I am today now in that field quite heavily, built a career out of it, nearly 20 years working as a fashion designer as well. And the story goes on.
The story goes on. And thank you very much for drawing that for us, Jacqueline. I want to go back a little bit to the fashion wheel.
Yes.
Because I'm imagining. I didn't have a fashion wheel. I had fashion plates. This was more like a rectangular thing, but the fashion wheel, it sounds like this unlocked something in your imagination that
Mm.
and in so doing, it helped to, I don't know, it feels to me like you had the fashion wheel, so you had a toy that your mother had given you, and this allowed you to play and practice and unlock a portion of your imagination. And then the idea that you would set up scenarios and perhaps clothing for your teddy bears. Like you would look at a box of cereal and say, you know what, that's a cereal box, and it is also a ping pong game
Right.
for my bears. And that is richly creative. And one of the reasons that I wanted to talk with you today on the topic of creative liberation, this is something that we've been talking through or around either directly or
Mm.
indirectly. And so, could you answer the question, what does creative liberation mean for you? Do you see it from your earliest days of childhood to now? You could offer a definition for what creative liberation has meant for you.
I would say it's a level of autonomy. And I say that no one's really asked me that kind of question before, if I'm honest. But when I think of it, looking back on my career and looking at where I didn't feel liberated in my creativity was actually probably nearer the end of my design careers and working for other brands and retailers. When you get into a system within the fashion industry of doing things on Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop, and you become very digital and you're losing the creative nuances that come with the textile industry. And I found that I was losing autonomy over my creativity, being fit into a box. And I feel that creative liberation is having autonomy to release that thought in your head or to see it manifest into a real thing. That's how I see it. And I'm a Christian, and I do believe very strongly in God, as in the Father God. And the fact that when I look at the Bible, I look at the fact that God was a creator. And, the
Mm.
Bible talks about that he made us in his image. And I always say, God, I don't know if I'm even very good at this fashion thing. I just know I like it. And if I'm made in your image, then I can create something. I can do anything is possible. I don't see limits. It's about being limitless and having autonomy over the creative ideas in your mind to bring
Oh,
them into realization.
oh, that is wonderful. I think I love that because
Mm.
in terms of because of the autonomy and what I'm hearing you say, talking about your work in the fashion industry, is that there seem to be two things that one could identify as being challenging about being in the industry. One is some of the tech that you just described. That of
Mm.
course it's important to know Corel and Adobe Illustrator and all of the digital programs that you need to create and to reproduce.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I think you are right that you lose the texture, you lose the sense of the text, the tactility, of the
Exactly.
textile. And so I really felt that when you said, yeah, I know the tech, I can do that, but I felt like I was losing the attachment to the textile, the fibers, the fabric. That was something that you felt slipping away a little bit through this particular technique. And then the other thing that I thought that was important that you reminded us of is that institutions are institutions. They create
Yeah.
systems. They have certain outcomes that they want to produce. They don't necessarily care about all of your ideas. They just want
Yeah.
some of your ideas, maybe very few of your ideas, and instead they want you to execute their ideas. So,
Mhm.
is that an accurate summary of what you just said? Because that's what really just reached out to me. I was just like, wow.
Yeah, first of all, caveat. I love my career. Most aspects of my career. I love it, and I don't work as a designer anymore. There's some amazing perks and pros, samples, and travel, and all these things you get to do, parties and things like that you get to go to. And so there's a great aspect of it. But I think once you realize how the industry really works, it's like, no, this is actually what is expected. So you come in as a newbie out of uni, and many of them like that, but you're going to come in fresh, untouched, virginal in many ways. Excuse the pun, but you come in,
Mm-hmm.
untouched in your creativity, and you're going to bring them something fresh and new. But then they can mold you. as you get older, you start to realize this is how things work, and you understand how what sells, what doesn't sell, what companies really want. You just bring them that. They know you can bring that, but they also know that you're worth much more than just a design. But oh gosh, do they want to pay you for it? That's the other aspect that we could go into, but that's a whole nother section of things.
This would be
But
we could get to that, or we could have another conversation on another day. But I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate it so much
mm,
because I think it's important for us to identify these things, for us to be able to speak and say, hey, there are wonderful aspects of this career. There's wonderful aspects of many and all careers. And then
mm,
there's some things that need to be changed and improved, and things that need to be identified as problematic. And I think recognizing our individual value, our individual importance, your individual value and importance to a design house, to a company. I think that is also something to announce and to say, hey, you might think that I'm only able to do this one or two things that you're asking, but I
mm.
have so much more.
But you know what? This is what I mean. When you start to understand it, you can decide to just accept it, or you can try to shape things a way that could work in your favor. So when I started to feel that particular way, I was working for one of the major sports brands, loved my time there. It was like a family. We the company closed the London office at one point, so we all left together, which was actually nice. But I remember during my time there, I was there for some years, and I decided that I wanted to do more studies and I wanted to look into sustainability. I knew the company was going that way as well, so I knew it lined up with their focus on being a sustainable lifestyle sports brand. And I reached out to them to say, could you sponsor my degree? By thank God, by grace of God, but they eventually did say yes, and
Wow,
they
excellent.
sponsored my 2 year masters on ethical
Yes,
fashion. So I
yes.
managed to become somebody of importance, relevance, or a niche within the company because I was then bringing back things to the company. I was doing feasibility tests within the company. I was working on some of one of their programs, which was similar to, you may have heard of Cradle to Cradle, which is basically like a circular fashion kind of project. So nothing goes back into the ground,
Oh,
can all be
wonderful.
replenished. If it does go back in the ground and be reused from the soil back to grow new textiles or cotton or whatever it may be.
Wow.
So I would manage to take part in many of the new projects that we're doing at that time. So I carved something out for myself because, oh yes, I thought my ceiling had been reached in the company. There was nowhere else really to move. I could just enjoy and just do my job, get paid and go home. But I wanted more. And I always believe that we've got more to give, that we have purpose, that our life is, for me, not everybody may feel the same way, but for me, I feel that we have a purpose in this life. And I felt that there was more that I could offer to the world and do for myself. And so this, unknown to myself, kicked off a whole new career, whole business of which I'm in right now. And yeah, yeah, we'll get into all of that. But I think sometimes you can look at your situation, you can carve out something for yourself. So you can stand out in those unique situations.
And you have absolutely done that. And again, the more you talk, the more I hear creative liberation. I
Yeah,
hear you saying I felt like I had hit the ceiling of what I could do at this company, and I know that there's more. It's just might not be here. It might not be the way that I'm doing things now. And then you ended up talking with them and connecting with them, and then going on to get a master's degree in ethical fashion.
exactly.
And so tell us a bit more about what does a graduate degree or an advanced degree in ethical fashion look like? What does that prepare someone to do?
Okay, well, I made it. It was probably not what my lecturer or supervisor was expecting, but it was literally a master's, a 2 year study to go into every element really of the supply chain. So looking at sustainable supply chains, value chains. We focused a lot on the cotton industry, which is what I became a bit of a geek within in that kind of area. And we looked at things like secondhand clothing, which was another big thing for me, especially looking at the Africa context. So I focused on Africa for that, but within the studies, these are just areas that we looked at. New textile technology, so things like mushroom, leather, pineapple, Pinatex, and all these kind of new textiles, which is just evolving even more these days. Circular fashion wasn't such a big name then, but it was, like I said, the cradle to cradle process that was out at the time, as it was called. So looking at things like that and what's happening within the industry, labor issues as well, fair trade, all of these
Yes.
areas, we look at all of these things. And at the time, that was the only kind of sustainable, ethical fashion degree or masters that they had in here in the UK, even probably in Europe. And then I did mine at one university. Then the London College of Fashion also created one, and they were the only two institutes. My one, which was the UCA, or University College of Arts, and then the London College of Fashion did. They were the only two institutes. Now they have incorporated it, as they probably should. Most universities incorporated those studies into their general fashion, because it's not a separate thing.
Yes.
Sustainable fashion should be just fashion. Full stop.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because if we want things to continue,
Mm-hmm.
they have to be sustainable. You would imagine that everyone is interested in the sustainability of their field. You want it to grow. If you want to have more textiles, more fabric, more fibers, more beautiful things to work with, you can't just deplete and destroy in the process, because where's the new stuff going to come from?
It's true. It's true.
So I wanted to turn a little bit to, before I do that, you said making textiles out of mushrooms and pineapples. And I think you called it
Pinatex is the company that
pineapple leather. Can I just tell you
Yeah.
how excited I am as someone who loves food and, and also really likes
with
pineapple?
you, my favorite
Pineapple
fruit.
could be a leather. You can wear this, and then afterward, maybe you could eat it.
Listen.
I am like, what?
Oh gosh, brutal. There's a lot of waste from food. I could go into it. I could geeked out on this stuff. I was going to conferences on sustainability, on textile technology, on general fashion, on all different things like that, because I wanted to learn so much. I became that girl who's always talking about Africa at these events.
Yes.
So they would know me for that. Learn about things like orange peel and seaweed textiles, obviously bamboo, which I'm probably more familiar with,
Yes.
the kind of viscose, cellulosic fabrics, and all these kind of things. And now there's even more. It is just, yeah. But because there's so much waste from food, and I think that it's a great thing. There's a company in Kenya that I really support, and they use, I think they're called the Green Nettles Company, but they use the nettles. They use nettles and produce a textile from that.
Nettles from nettles?
Yeah.
Those little bulbous things that
Them
prick your...
things that pin you, yeah.
That, and they make fabric from those nuisances. That is
Exactly.
incredible.
They needed that. There's cactus, I think that's done in, is it Mexico?
Yes, or New Mexico, I'm not sure.
Yeah, somewhere
but there's
over
a lot
on
of
your
cacti.
side of the world.
Yeah, but on our side of the world, in the Southwest, there are lots of cacti. So New Mexico, Arizona, Mexico, there's a lot of cacti over there. I find it very encouraging. And what I'm noticing is you were at the beginning of this in some ways. So when you went to get your degree, to get the master's in ethical fashion,
But they don't have that anymore. That degree doesn't exist anymore.
Because it's expanded, and people have realized that rather than saying, let's just make this a small separate thing, you say, let's make this something that shapes how we do what we do. And so I thought that the degree program, like you were saying, that the London College of Art, like they decided to do one as well. And now everything is just incorporated into how most people study fashion anywhere in the world. There is a component of the sustainability. So you're ahead of the curve in that.
Yeah, it took me a while to really accept a lot of the terms that people started to call me when I was saying, that I'm a pioneer in what I'm doing, especially within Africa, and talking about the ethical fashion Africa story, and expert in this industry. It was challenging to really accept these things, because for me, I'm just doing the thing I love, even like Steve Jobs said. Just doing what I love, and I love research. I went on to do another master's and did a research master's, because I love researching, finding out, asking questions. I was that kid at school. I'm that annoying kid that's at school and they're always putting their hand up to ask questions. That was me.
Hey,
Unashamedly.
I admire all Hermione Grangers. You
Oh,
know, I was a Hermione Granger, and if you were a Hermione Granger, we're smart black girls who
that's how you
raise
know.
our hands.
Hmm.
And I call Hermione Granger because I'm a big Harry Potter fan, and that's what popped into my head. I know
Last day glasses and all.
yeah, hashtag problematic faves. I understand that. But yeah, you're smart. You're inquisitive. You're
Yeah.
curious. And you were able to follow all of those things into a career. And I think that's
Mm.
something that's really model worthy and something about which you should be proud. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, everybody. And when we come back, we're going to talk about wax and wraps in the subscription box and her sourcing trips and the companies that she's attached with on the continent. So stay tuned and be sure to come back right after the break. Black Women Stitch and the Stitch Please podcast are happy to announce that we have another way to connect with our community. In addition to the IG Lives that we do every Thursday at 3 p.m., we also now have a club on Clubhouse. That's right, friends. They done messed up and given me the chance to have a club. Follow Black Women Stitch on Instagram and now on Clubhouse Thursdays at 3 p.m. on Instagram and 3:45 p.m. on Clubhouse Eastern Standard Time. And we'll help you get your stitch together. Welcome back, everyone. You are listening to the Stitch Please podcast, and I am happy and delighted to be speaking with Jacqueline Shaw of Wax and Wraps, of the African Fashion Guide, of so many other things. But we are talking with her today about creative liberation. And if you were here for the first part of the episode, you learned that Jacqueline began her career as a child through creativity, through turning a toy, the fashion wheel, which now I want to go look for, a fashion wheel into a spark for her imagination. And now we have this person who is contributing and leading the way in so many different aspects of how we imagine African fashion. So I wanted to ask you about your 2011 book, The African Fashion Guide. Can you talk a bit about that work and why you thought that was necessary, why you thought it was time to produce a book like that?
Yeah. So 2011, I finished my master's in ethical fashion and I wanted to create something. I needed to create something. I did my dissertation, as you do, as part of the degree, and I said, I'm going to create a blog, I'm going to organize a conference, and I'm going to create a book. Because I had worked previously as a student. Prior to that, I'd worked part-time at a library, a local library. And so I'd seen in those sections based on Africa, the kind of books they had. And all the books were your typical Maasai, very tribal, very loincloth kind of imagery about Africa and its different cultures, cultural groups, etc. And I thought, that could be a cool book on like contemporary African fashion. So I didn't see it, went out and made it. That's my mindset. If you don't see it, go out and make it. So I put together a book. Because I was already blogging, I contacted loads of different designers across the African continent, even some in the diaspora, those who were doing fashion in Africa. And I literally created the book. And using InDesign, I put the pages together, everything, did interviews, I commissioned some illustrators for the first version of the book. And I put that out there at the time that I launched the conference at the end of my degree in September 2011. So that book was called Fashion Africa, and the company is called Africa Fashion Guide. Now, the book was spotted at a Black Book event a few years later by a publicist called Jacaranda Books. And they were actually a newly launched publishing company who had worked, and the lady in charge had worked for other publishing companies, and she felt similar time that there wasn't enough publishing companies that represented people of color. And so my book was literally her first publication that they put out there, and we redid the book.
Pioneer again.
I know, right?
I just want pioneer again.
So she put the book out there, but we redid it, so it was like a volume 2 of the book, and we hope to work together on see something within the same series of the Fashion Africa series. So it should be coming out next year. But yeah, the book was pioneering. It was needed because there wasn't any contemporary African fashion, textiles, crafts, or anything at the time. And now my book has been featured all over the world. It's been seen and spotted in different places. I get texts and messages. I've brought it to places. I've just seen it in places. And so it literally has pioneered. And so now there's more books out there now, which I feel is really exciting to see that more and more people have been able to feel, the opening to do this. So I'm really excited about that. Really, really excited. And yeah, Fashion Africa 2011 was when I launched that book.
It's really amazing. And I really appreciate the way that you are drawing attention to the variety of fashion movements throughout the continent. I recall looking at a section based on a woman who was elevating, not elevating. I hate to use the word elevating because it implies that something is low and then needs to be brought up. But I think what her work was doing is preserving traditional Hosa fashion and textiles and uniting them with modern design structures. That's something I remember from the book. I was like, oh my gosh, that is so amazing. And that you had countries from all over with people being represented. And I thought that was really amazing.
Exactly.
It's really a great and rich thing, a really great and rich offering that you're doing. Advocacy as well, by having people be seen and recognized and appreciated and valued for their work. And I'm a strong believer in giving people their flowers while they're here.
Thank you.
Giving people their flowers while they are here. While they can appreciate them and smell them and put them on their tables.
But on that point though of advocacy, because at the time, just after I launched organically, it wasn't even by choice, but I launched Africa Fashion Guide as a company. Because I'd been focusing a lot on the cotton industry, I brought some t-shirts to the catwalk. And it might sound like simple t-shirts, but they were slogan t-shirts. So I like this designer called Catherine Hamner. I like the kind of way that she used t-shirts as a way to spread a message. She's very much like an ethical fashion eco warrior kind of thing. And she used that as a way to speak out about things that she, really stood up for or stood against. And I thought I could do the same using t-shirts that were African cotton, fair trade, organic, made in Africa, made by Africans, sourced in Africa, grown in Africa, all of that, and brought that to the catwalk. We did it as part of London Fashion Week, within Ghana Fashion Week, and also in Africa Fashion Week in Los Angeles. And that was really to bring light on the idea of the African cotton farmers who were not receiving the same subsidies as those maybe in the US or in Europe or parts of Asia, where they would get the same level of subsidy. They would get subsidized on their cottons, and they could actually sell at more cost and make more money. And I thought it was unfair, because the African cotton was handpicked, it was organic, a lot of it, and it was done in a way that they deserved it. And I wanted to raise a point about that, and I used this as a way to do that. And I remember the London Fashion Week event was literally packed. I did it in collaboration with another company, and it was a packed out event. There were people sitting on the floors to be part of this event.
And what were some of the messages that you had on the shirts to bring awareness to the ways in which African cotton farmers were being exploited and treated inequitably in the global marketplace?
Yeah, so we just use words as in 100% made in Africa. So things that people would be like, what, really? 100%? No way. But they were. We'd use things like saying from crop to cloth, from field to fashion, fair trade. We just used all these terms that just let people know what they were made of. I made them inquire more, so we got the articles featured elsewhere so that it could actually raise people's curiosities. So that's what I wanted to do, because nobody was talking about African fashion in the catwalks either. So it was another aspect of, like I said, enlightening and opening up people's minds to possibilities or new types of fashion or new regions of fashion.
Absolutely. And at the same time, talking about and bringing our awareness to the ways in which the same policies or political forces of globalization that are leading to supply chain issues that are harming people, that farmers are being
Yeah,
harmed, that people are not, they're not gaining wealth, they're not sustaining their own wealth, they're, you know what I'm saying, that there's ways in which fashion can be harmful and has been harmful. And
absolutely.
what you're doing is saying, hey, rather than just saying, I'm going to grab a strip of this ceremonial cloth and put it on a jacket for a European fashion company and call it African fashion, you're saying that not only is that not okay, it's also not okay what is happening here. And we need to look at the economics of the folks who are making it possible
Absolutely.
for this fashion to exist at all. And I recall this, I think you had an article called Cotton is the Ink back on the blog, and I believe that it was about the importance of cotton. If we imagine you need ink to write a book, to write a paper, to paint, to draw,
Mm.
and without ink, what how are you going to create? And without
It's
cotton,
a foundation of fashion, the history. When you write something, that's it for life. That's heritage. That's history. And that actual article was in relation to an interview I did with a Malian designer, and she just celebrates the textiles. Our Maita, she celebrates, as named the designer, she celebrates the textiles of her own country. Mali is one of those countries that produces a lot of cotton as well, and it has an indigo
mm-hmm.
story. But Mali is
Aha.
somewhere that people will hear about the negative stories, about political unrest. But we don't always hear about the fact of one of the first universities, being, some of the richest people. It's in the past, we don't really hear about these things because we're so busy hearing about the poverty side of things. And there's a cultural story that even she wanted to go and share and tell that through using textiles and the cotton story. Cotton is a deep industry. As an African American, of course, you know even more the impact
Yes,
on
absolutely.
your continent. And then me traveling to cotton fields in Africa, traveling to meet with these makers, with the farmers, with these creators and manufacturing units. This needs to be celebrated. This needs to be brought out. As I say, give people their flowers. The stories need to be told, and I was happy to be the one that was fighting to get the word out. And now things are easier. More people are talking about it. By the time I was doing it, it was tough, but I did it, and I didn't give
Yes.
up.
I'm glad that you didn't. I'm glad that you didn't give up. What I appreciate about your story, about concentrating on the African Fashion Guide, the combination of having a degree in ethical fashion and concentrating in sustainability, and how that's an important part of just your ethical and overall approach. I really like how that transfers to your relationship with African creatives in general. And
Mm.
that gives me a chance to ask you now about the Wax and Wrap subscription box, because first of all, it's beautiful. That's the first thing
Thank
that you can tell
you.
if you look at the outside when you see this box in your mailbox, that you are getting something good. And so
Wonderful.
that is really lovely. But what I wanted to also ask about was one of the things I noticed in the most recent something I saw on Instagram that you'd done was you took us through a factory where
Mm-hmm.
people were manufacturing fabric on these gigantic rolls, and it was incredible. And I was like, I am watching fabric being manufactured in Africa and then being put into a box to be sent all over the world. Can you talk about why it's important to have relationships with farmers and dyers and weavers and designers and all of these folks that you then essentially represent their work through the subscription service of Wax and Wraps? Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, you know what? The whole I know we had like last year during the pandemic the whole thing about amplification of voices. Now that's something that is what it is, but that's something that personally I don't want to be doing that whole they said, we said kind of thing. I want to share it from their perspective. And that's always been something I've wanted to do, is to speak with the people, have them tell me have them share with my community their experience. Because I'm a
Mm.
British born black girl. I don't know what it's like to live in northern Ghana, for example, or
Mm-hmm.
in Zimbabwe. I can have loads of friends who do, and right now I do, but I think it's important that the voices, the stories of people are told. Coming from being of Caribbean heritage, there's one thing that we you know, people have been known to do is through oral stories.
Yes.
And that's how heritage has been passed down. That's how, like, the stories of the Anansi spider, things like these have been
Yes.
passed from the African continent to the Caribbeans. And that's how they hear about, like from my heritage, the Maroon tribe, which is some of my family have originated from them. And you hear these stories of Queen Nanny of the Maroons and Brother Kojo and Kofi. And, you hear about these stories, and this oral histories. It's the importance of documentation of our histories, putting these things down. We don't do it enough, and that's why we get others telling our stories. And so for me, when I was blogging, yes, it was blogging because I love research and I was really into the prints. I loved wow, it's exciting. But it's important that there's something on the internet that is going to be there for as long as I have the websites up, or my book is going to be there till the end of time.
Yes.
Telling these stories. And for me, going to the wax print houses, going and tell the stories that, yes, as we know, the wax print heritage with the Dutch firm, Velisco, and traveling back to the Indonesian heritage. No, but what has been done in Africa, what aspect of that has been done in the African continent? Is it all a Dutch heritage? Is it something that is done also in the African continent? Many people don't know. They'll easily buy the fabrics and don't realize that the ones they're buying very likely made in China, made in India, made in other parts of Europe, Italian firms and so forth. But when we're talking about African prints,
yes.
So if we can, I source our fabrics from these wax print houses, so we've got sellers that I work with and we get it done, even the wax print houses, or even more importantly, for me personally, because I still question if print is really African, or it's still like a question that we go on about all the time.
Yes, it is such a debatable, it's such a good question.
So debatable. If I say, okay, you know what? In my boxes, I'm bringing batiks, adire, tie and dye, hand woven cloth. I know I got that batik from Mr. Kone in Cote d'Ivoire. I know I got that print from Edwina in Sierra Leone.
Yes.
I know I got that print from Madu in Nigeria. Handmade.
Yes.
That's where it came from. I can tell you that it's coming from there. And then it's going to the rest of the world, and they're getting educated on textiles done in Nigeria, handmade. That tradition can keep going. That tradition can be kept alive. And the stories are going to be continuing. And people from around the world, because my customers are from all over.
Yes.
And they're making products using these textiles and wearing it. For me, now the story goes on.
The story goes on.
Exactly.
I love that. The story goes on, and you are helping to propel that story and to, more importantly, as you say, preserve that story.
That's right.
And I so appreciate your acknowledgement of some of the controversies around wax print. And we had the director of the wax print film. She was on the program earlier in the year. She's so great. I really like her. And she was saying, like, she thinks wax print is hybrid cloth, but she doesn't particularly wear it, and she would rather concentrate on the fabrics that she knows is going to, in her words, contribute to the intergenerational wealth of African children. And so when I hear you say that, okay, I got this from Edwina, or I got this from Madu, I got this from the person in Cote d'Ivoire, I got this from the person in Northern Ghana, I got this from that is the type of connections that you have created to have sustainable relationships. So that people are going to be able to continue to produce this work at home, in their home communities, their home countries, and support their families and the entire community through the industry. And
have fun with it. The hashtag is have fun with prints, and give a print a home.
Give a print.
And I think it's important. Again, we go back to the original discussion about my creativity and having the autonomy was really important, and liberation. And I want people to have fun. For me, it's something that you have fun with. You bring back your creativity, the things that you're in control. of what you do with that cloth. You can make anything.
Yes, indeed.
With that. And that's the fun of it. You can make a bed sheet. You can make a pair of trousers. You can make something as a gift for somebody. There's so much possibility of what you can do with that cloth, making something out of nothing. That's powerful. That is so powerful. Yeah, that's even, you're getting something from it and you're giving back something. And that's the importance of having the wax and wraps in the boxes that are created. And yeah.
It's like you're giving someone the gift of possibility.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
I am so grateful that we have had a chance to have this conversation today, Jacqueline. Thank you so much for being here with me today. And you all, you can find Jacqueline absolutely everywhere. There are so many links in the episode notes that she actually forgot about one of the things that she does and forgot to tell me because she has so many wonderful irons in the fire, as it were. Well, tell folks, how can we find you on the socials? Where would you like us to best look for you?
Okay, so if you are a home sewer, a lover of prints, and you like to create things yourself, head over to Wax and Wraps. That's Wax and Wraps over on Instagram or waxandwraps.com, where you can become a subscriber or get a one-off box, but you will totally love the prints. We do a different country every single month, so make sure to head over there. And if you are somebody who is starting a fashion business and you want to do an African fashion business, where you're going to create product to sell to the rest of the world in quantities, and you want to get introduced to manufacturers and suppliers, we work with suppliers all over the continent. So go to Africa Fashion Guide on Instagram and send me a DM, reach out, slide in my DMs and say hello. I reply to everyone. So you definitely can connect with us in those two places.
That is wonderful. You all, we have been talking with Jacqueline Shaw of Wax and Wraps and the African Fashion Guide. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
You've been listening to the Stitch Please podcast, the official podcast of Black Women Stitch, the sewing group where Black Lives Matter. We appreciate you supporting us by listening to the podcast. If you'd like to reach out to us with questions, you can contact us at blackwomenstitch@gmail.com. If you'd like to support us financially, you can do that by supporting us on Patreon, Patreon. And you can find Black Women Stitch there in the Patreon directory. And for as little as $2 a month, you can help support the project with things like editing, transcripts, and other things to strengthen the podcast. And finally, if financial support is not something you can do right now, you can really help the podcast by rating it and reviewing it anywhere you listen to podcasts that allows you to review them. So I know that not all podcast directories or services allow for reviews, but for those who do, for those that have a star rating or just ask for a few comments, if you could share those comments and say nice things about us at the Stitch Please podcast, that is incredibly helpful. Thank you so much. Come back next week and we'll help you get your stitch together.